Yeah, hello everyone. I'd like to share my experience with the NRE accounts. I live in the US, so this I, I'm not entirely certain how it applies if you live in other countries. I'm guessing it's the same, but since I live in the US, it's probably going to be applicable for other people who live in the US. NRE accounts. I believe it stands for non-resident external. So this is a type of account that is available in banks in India, both nationalized banks and private banks, where a person living out overseas, like myself, is able to deposit a certain amount of money and gain interest, depending on what the rate is. The interest rate that I got was in the ballpark of about 7.5, 7.6%. And the interest was, the way I'd set it up was it would be credited to my account every 3 months. The reason why I decided to make this video is to, number one, share my experience, and number two, if you are contemplating, if you want to make this investment, it hopefully it helps you evaluate the risk, returns criteria. I opened two NRE accounts, one in the State Bank of Mysore and the other one is in Canara Bank. Um, I believe it was 2016, in the April, May of 2016. That's when I was down there to visiting family. So that's when I opened those accounts. In fact, I may have opened those accounts a little bit earlier in January when I was down there. But the transfer of funds from here to those accounts was done in April of 2016. So, if you remember, or if you're curious, if you want to check the foreign exchange rate during the time, a dollar to rupee exchange was pretty high during the time. It had gone up to the point where it was closer to 68. It even crossed 68 a few times. I remember it being in the ballpark of 67, 68. Again, I was new to foreign exchange, new to investing altogether at that time. Some of my, I guess my rationale or interest may have been pretty naive, but nevertheless, I guess my thought process about investing into the Indian bank at that time was, it's if I can send money in at the rate of, let's say, 67 or 68, and if considering that Indian economy continue to do well, does well over the next 1 year, there's a good likelihood that the rupee would appreciate in value. So the hope and dream at that time was I would send money into those NRE accounts at about 67, 68, and 1 year down the line gain all that interest. And so when I bring it back, the rate would be closer to 64 or 65, or even less, hopefully, where I could, number one, get the interest on that money, plus also benefit from the foreign exchange slide. So a 7.5% rate of interest in addition to the foreign exchange could easily go up to 14, 15% or even higher. So that was my rationale when I invested. Again, one piece of advice I would give to you if you're on my boat is start small. I didn't. I started big, which was a very stupid thing to do. But long story short, I did all right. I made close to 10% returns or even higher. So, from a financial perspective, I did pretty well. But I would really, really urge you guys to read up and understand foreign exchange, how that works, because there's always a cut. So if, let's say, the rate is at 65, for argument's sake, so $1 is 65 rupees. There is when you sell let's say a dollar, And when you buy dollars, there's a certain amount of top and bottom, above and beyond the 65, and that's how either the banks or the brokers will make their money. So if it's 65, you won't necessarily get 65, and it always works against you, that thing I'm talking about, in foreign exchange. So it has to be something you have to consider when you want to make an investment like this. And second thing is this: make sure you talk to the bank, and understand how it's done. Again, being naive and being, um, in some ways I would say not non-informed, I took some rash risk. I'm here to talk about it simply because I may have had some luck on my side, and I did all right. Um, so 11-12% returns a year is not a bad deal at all. But anyways, my story was this. So I opened those accounts in January of 2016. April, just before I left to India, I wired the money to those bank accounts. So Swift, it's SWIFT. That's the methodology I use to transfer money. Swift is a very efficient way to transfer money between countries. I use Bank of America, so I sent some money to State Bank of Mysore, which is now State Bank of India after all those acquisitions. So I sent a certain amount of money to that bank, and the other bank I sent money to was Canara Bank. Swift transfers happen pretty fast. They happen within a few hours. Again, talk to the bank managers, talk to the banks, understand what foreign exchange rate applies. When I sent it, I believe it again depends on the rate at which the transaction is done, and there's a certain cut. So it's, the critical aspect of it is, in a given day, foreign exchange values can easily fluctuate. Typically, they don't fluctuate that much, no more than even less than 0.5%. But there are times when things can, be very, very abrupt, especially if there's some kind of a financial announcement, political reasons, war. And there's a lot of different reasons why foreign exchange can fluctuate substantially. So critical aspect about that is when you want to do the transaction, and if that's something the bank can accommodate. Again, these are things you have to know if you want to do these transactions. Anyways, so I sent it. I think I sent it at like 66 and a half, 60, close to 67, which wasn't a bad exchange rate. Once the money gets in there, then I flew down to India because I was visiting family. So during the time, I went to the banks, opened these NRE accounts for a term deposit of 1 year. And those days in 2016, the interest rate was at 7.5, 7.5. Again, it depends on how much money you put in. If you put more than 10 lakhs, there's certain interest rates. I forget, there's certain tiers. Again, look into those tiers, and interest rates have decreased substantially since then. It's been close to 2 years since that time, so the interest rates have come down, which actually makes it, you would wonder, is it even worth it if the interest rate that the bank can give you is 6 or 5.5? Is it worth all that risk, taking the foreign exchange risk, into consideration? Anyways, I opened those accounts, and the way I set it up was interest would be credited to my other account. It's also an NRE account, so I had 2 NRE accounts in each bank. One was the NRE savings account, and the other one was the NRE term deposit. So money would be transferred from the term deposit to the savings every 3 months. So I set it up, and after that, for some time, again, partially because of my ignorance, I was a happy camper. It's a guaranteed returns of 7.5 plus. Everything. My intuition was that the dollar is going to depreciate, the rupee is going to appreciate, so it's going to go down to like 62. Who knows, right? Hopefully even lower than 62. But combined, I would get like 15-20% returns. Good deal. There's one more thing at that point of time I wasn't aware, is which kind of became aware and took care of it. But NRE accounts have to be announced, or information regarding that has to be submitted to the IRS, and it's taxable income. It's interest income. So that's one more thing you have to factor in the tax. As I'm learning now, there's multiple ways to kind of minimize your tax, and this is not one of them. The interest has to be declared, and you have to pay tax on that. The good thing though is you don't have to pay taxes in India, NRE accounts, and so that's, I guess, one benefit you could call that. Regardless, you got to pay tax in one place. The other advantage is this: any amount of money can be sent and repatriated back to the U.S. There's no limits on these NRE accounts, so that's one more benefit. So anyways, May of 2016 to May of 2017 was when my accounts were mature, right? A lot of things happened during the time. The rates, what I got it was like 60, I sent it at close to 67, which I thought, there's no way it's going up since then. It has to go down, right? Surprise, surprise. Rates began climbing up. And again, a lot of things were new to me. I wasn't able to make sense of it. And even to this day, when it comes to foreign exchange, there's a lot of factors that affect how one currency, goes up or goes down against another currency. Dollar against the rupee. Dollar especially is directly related to oil prices, gold prices. So if oil prices go up, dollar typically tends to drop. And vice versa. So, and there's one more interaction. Now, the Indian rupee can appreciate or depreciate, due to other reasons, political reasons, war. We have Pakistan on one side, China on the other. And a lot of this need not even be a real war. It can just be emotions, people's emotions. A small thing like a little bit of a skirmish on the border can cause a lot of flurries, just like in the stock market. Same thing with foreign exchange. So these are things you got to factor in. Anyways, since I deposited the money, the exchange rate began to go up. So like I said, when I did it, it was 66 and a half, maybe 67. Since then, for many months, 4 or 5 months, I would say, it kept climbing, 60, 68. It almost went to 69. And if you remember, a couple of things happened in 2016, which I believe had an impact on this. So the rupee continued to depreciate. One of the reasons was the demonetization. That was a big blow to the rupee, at least on a short time basis. And the other thing was India and Pakistan had a bit of a skirmish. So the Indian army crossed over and conducted a surgical strike. And there was a lot of apprehension that there would be a war. So that's one more thing that kind of dragged this down. But combined, it kept climbing. And those days, I wasn't a happy person at all. I would look at these things ongoing. And the good thing though is with all this paranoia and search, I've to some extent educated myself on foreign exchange. And there's a lot more to it. Investopedia has a lot of good information. Investing.com, forex.com, they have a lot of good information if you're interested in learning more about foreign exchange trading. Anyways, what I did wasn't in essence a foreign exchange trading. It was more of investment, which had the currency risk attached to it, right? So long story short, that entire year, I would say I wasn't necessarily in peace, simply because I had invested large sums of money there, hoping to get decent returns, and the currency kind of went up and down a lot. Good news is this: starting 2017, the rupee began to appreciate further and further and further, which brought the rate down to 65, even 64. So for my luck, again, RBI, Reserve Bank of India, controls some of this in a certain range. They buy and sell dollars accordingly. So, why that happened, it's kind of a difficult question to answer. India's economy is done well, the GDP, plus Trump came into power, so it's possible that I mean, the U.S. Feds were intentionally trying to depreciate the dollar to make exportation easier. Again, this is a very, I guess, complex topic when it comes to foreign exchange. That's the reason why I urge you guys to, I mean, educate yourself before doing something like this. Um, Anyways, it worked in my benefit. The rates began to drop. The rupee, basically was appreciating against the dollar. So May of 2017, my term deposit closed. So during the time, I had, obviously gained all the interest plus the principal. So I managed to get my money back repatriated, I believe in June, when the rates were like close to 64 and a half. So that worked out in my benefit, sending it in close to 67, 66 and a half, and getting it back at 64. In addition to interest, I made that, additional 3-4% of, money. And one more thing to keep in mind is this. If you're doing those transactions from here and working with these nationalized banks like State Bank of India and Canara Bank, it's an extremely painful process. The bank managers are simply not informed. They don't really have a clue. And you have to somehow get to talk to the corporate people who actually know this. I mean, end of the day, my understanding is that you do get a better rate, especially when the amount is higher than 20 lakhs. You get a better rate from nationalized banks versus a private sector bank. But again, it comes down to when exactly the transaction is done, and when it's outside of your control, it's a very painful process. Trying to follow up, make sure it's done at the right time, anyways, once the transaction is done, you fill out the paperwork, send it. The transaction gets done, and the money shows up in your account within like 8 hours, I would say tops. Which a swift transfer is pretty effective. I did both of them in June, from what I can recall of last year. It worked out pretty well from that perspective. Anyways, long story short, I did all right. Some of it was pure luck. Some of it may have been my timing. I took some risks, and fortunately, I'm here to talk about it. Made money, but what I would suggest is, number one, educate yourself. Make sure you talk to the banks, and make sure they understand, you understand what it is. In fact, I would think, would I ever do something like that again? Never. Trying to work with these nationalized banks in India, and considering all the currency risk, I would say, it's worth it. There's many other ways you can probably make significantly more money investing right here in the US. But if you still want to do it, and you understand it better than me, you find something that where you want to take that risk and for the big returns. These are things I would say, understand foreign exchange, how rates fluctuate, understand how you can work with the banks to make sure it's done your way, and also look into what the NRE accounts give you in terms of interest, because the interest rates have dropped significantly over the last year to a couple of years. Anyways, I mean, the good thing of this is I kind of got educated a lot in foreign exchange, and how that thing works, and now I'm looking into more of a forex trading. Again, I'm certainly not going to do anything large in terms of large amounts of money. If I take that risk, it's going to be small. In some ways, it is like gambling. But there's something called leverage that is used in foreign exchange, where by investing a small amount of money and using leverage, there's a chance to make good returns. Again, no one's an expert when it comes to foreign exchange. People who who worked in this industry many years can also make mistakes in this. So again, it's a learning process, and being financially literate is, is the key to getting these things right. Because one example I'd like to give, I know this video has been a bit long and monotonous, but if this is an investment that you're planning to make, it takes time and understanding before take that risk. So one thing I'd like to share is this. In 2016, when, like I was saying before, when the rupee began to depreciate against the dollar substantially, it went close to 68, even 69 during that time. A couple of reasons for that were the demonetization and also the surgical strike. But in addition to that, there's probably other reasons that contributed to that. So during that time, there was a lot of panic, and I was closely following the exchange rates in multiple websites. And a lot of experts, people who have worked in this industry for 20, 30 years, people who are economists, people who are, who've been doing foreign exchange investing for all their life. A lot of them, in fact, everybody, I would say with the exception of one or two, everybody thought it's going to continue going up to 70. It's going to break that 70 barrier, and the rupee is going to continue to depreciate further. Again, like I said a little before, RBI does kind of control it to an extent. So I guess that's in some ways, you're guaranteed, or at least the hope that you're guaranteed that the range of the US to dollar to rupee exchange is held between a certain range, like between 64 and 68. Again, this is not something you can read up as a statement that RBI's policy is this. That I'm assuming, based on studying the maps, that's been the policy. And the way they control it is when it continues to, when the rupee continues to appreciate, they will buy dollars in an effort to depreciate it, and vice versa. When the rupee begins to depreciate, they will begin to sell dollars in order for the rupee to appreciate. So that's how they kind of control in the ballpark. But those policies can change anytime, and that's not something you will hear them say that that's what they're trying to do. So be aware of that too. So yeah, I know this has been a pretty long thing, but hopefully this information is beneficial to you if you're trying to take this route. Again, evaluate your risk and make a informed decision. So thanks everyone. Good luck investing.